The Young and the Restless, spoilers, full. The moment Diane sensed something was wrong with Jack Abbott, it didn't come as a single shocking truth. Instead, it came to her in fragments, small, unsettling signals that gradually formed a picture she desperately wished wasn't true. Jack could always make mistakes, but Diane had convinced herself their marriage had grown stronger after everything they'd been through together. The years of competition, manipulation, and emotional warfare between them finally seemed to have settled. Yet beneath that fragile calm, something darker was quietly brewing, and Diane began to understand that the life she believed she had rebuilt with Jack might be crumbling once again. While Diane grappled with her doubts, events on the yacht were spiraling in a reckless and dangerous direction. Jack Abbott arrived there in a state of near consciousness. His thoughts were muddled, his judgment weakened by something he couldn't fully explain. The world around him seemed slightly distorted, as if his instincts were struggling to keep up with the fog that enveloped his mind. Standing before him was Patty Williams, a woman whose mere presence contained decades of turmoil, obsession, and emotional instability. Patty was inherently unpredictable, but tonight she seemed triumphant, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Jack struggled against the growing tension between them. Deep down, a voice warned him that this situation was wrong, that being alone with Patty in this situation was a terrible idea. But Patty didn't flinch. She moved closer with a confidence seemingly fueled by his confusion. Her words and gestures blended together until the distance between them completely disappeared. When their lips touched again, it was no longer an act of passion, but the result of Jack's gradual loss of control. Any remaining restraint he possessed was slowly vanishing. What followed was swift, almost mechanical. Jack, overwhelmed by the strange fog that enveloped his mind, allowed himself to fall into a moment he would soon regret with painful clarity. Clothes were removed, hesitation vanished, and the line between confusion and desire completely crumbled. However, for Patty, that moment held a completely different meaning. To her, it was like a long-awaited miracle, the realization of a dream she had cherished for years. In her mind, their connection was neither accidental nor manipulated. It was destiny finally revealed. But that illusion wouldn't last long. Away from the yacht, Diane Jenkins Abbott made a decision that would change everything. The moment she confirmed Jack's whereabouts, a cold resolve seized her. Diane had spent too many years fighting for her place in Jack's life to quietly accept the possibility of him betraying her again. She refused passivity, refused to let uncertainty engulf her any longer. If the truth awaited her on that yacht, she would confront it directly. Accompanied by Billy Abbott and Kyle Abbott, Diane boarded a small boat and crossed the dark waters toward the yacht where Jack was. The journey was tense and silent. Billy sensed the storm brewing within Diane, but even he seemed unsure how the night would end. Meanwhile, Kyle was consumed by a mixture of anxiety and determination. Jack was not only Diane's husband, but also Kyle's father. Whatever they were about to discover would affect all of them. As their boat reached the yacht, Diane's suspicions grew colder and sharper. She boarded the boat with a sense of urgency that allowed no room for hesitation. Each step she took through the corridors was heavier than the last, as if she already knew the truth but needed to see it with her own eyes. When Diane finally pushed open the bedroom door, the world seemed to freeze for a moment of horror. There in the middle of the room was Jack, lying in bed with Patty. The sight struck Diane like a physical blow. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was undeniable, clear, humiliating. For a brief second, she couldn't even speak. Shock etched itself on her face as the reality of what she was seeing sank into her mind. Behind her, Billy and Kyle also entered the room, drawn by the tension. Patty, however, reacted with a disturbing kind of amusement. Instead of showing embarrassment or fear, she seemed almost to enjoy this unexpected presence. Billy's reaction was one of stunned disbelief. He had expected drama, even confrontation, but nothing this explosive. Kyle's reaction was far more intense. Anger flared up instantly. The heavy mahogany door of the yacht's stateroom swung open with a violent thud, the sound echoing like a gunshot over the gentle lapping of the dark waters outside. Diane Jenkins Abbott stood frozen in the threshold, the damp, salty air of the marina clinging to her skin. Her chest heaved every breath, a jagged shard of glass in her lungs. Behind her, the silhouettes of her son Kyle and brother-in-law Billy crowded the narrow corridor. They had spent days consumed by a frantic, agonizing search, terrified that Victor Newman's ruthless vendetta had cost Jack his life. They had imagined him locked in a freezing cargo hold, beaten, starved, or worse. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared Diane for the grotesque tableau illuminated by the dim amber glow of the cabin's bedside lamp. There was Jack, her husband, the man who had defended her against the entire town of Genoa City, the man who had promised her forever. He was tangled in the rumpled, sweat-dampened sheets of the king-sized bed. And beneath him, her blonde hair splayed across the pillows like a halo of sheer madness, was Patty Williams. Patty. A certified psychopath. A woman who had brought nothing but terror and chaos to their lives. Oops, Patty giggled, a sickeningly sweet, unhinged sound that sliced through the suffocating silence. What the hell is going on? Diane's voice was barely a whisper, yet it commanded the room with the force of a hurricane. Her eyes wide and completely devoid of the relief she had expected to feel upon finding her husband alive locked onto Jack. Jack scrambled backward, his face draining of color until he looked like a corpse. He clutched the sheet to his chest, his eyes darting frantically between Diane, Kyle, and Billy. Diane, wait. It's not... Wow. Billy breathed from the hallway, his voice dripping with a mixture of profound shock and utter disgust. Kyle stepped forward, his jaw clenched so tight it looked as though it might shatter. Dad, are you kidding me? We have been worried sick about you, Diane said, her voice eerily calm, though her entire body trembled with a seismic rage. She stepped fully into the room, her heels clicking against the polished teak floorboards. We thought Victor had you locked away. We thought this lunatic wanted you dead. And here you are. In bed with her. Diane, please, we need to talk, Jack pleaded, his voice cracking. He stumbled out of the bed, hastily pulling on his discarded trousers. His hands shook violently. I don't know how this happened. I swear to you, I don't know. Diane's vision narrowed until the only thing in the world was Jack's panicked, guilty face. The man she loved, the man she had fought tooth and nail to be worthy of, had reduced their marriage to a cheap, sordid joke. He had betrayed her in the most vile, incomprehensible way possible. How can there be any explanation for being in bed with a psychopath? Diane asked, her voice rising, the eerie calm shattering into a million jagged pieces. It was the isolation. It was Victor's trap. Jack reached out, his fingers grazing her arm. I was desperate. I thought we were drugged. I thought... The slap echoed through the stateroom with the concussive force of a bomb detonating. Diane's palm struck Jack's cheek with every ounce of fury, heartbreak, and humiliation coursing through her veins. The impact snapped his head to the side, leaving a stark, blazing red handprint against his pale skin. The sound was so sharp, so violently final, that even Patty stopped giggling, pulling the sheets up to her chin. Jack staggered back, holding his face, his eyes wide with a devastating realization. In that single explosive strike, the foundation of their marriage crumbled into dust. The unwavering trust Diane had painstakingly built, the absolute faith she had placed in Jack Abbott, was obliterated. Don't you ever touch me again, Diane hissed, her voice vibrating with a lethal intensity. Tears finally breached the corners of her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. Do you hear me, Jack? Never again. Diane, you have to listen to me, Jack begged, tears streaming down his own face. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands raised in surrender. I love you. Only you. This meant nothing. It was a mistake, a horrible, unforgivable mistake, but we can survive this. We have survived so much worse. Survived? Diane let out a harsh, bitter laugh that held absolutely no humor. She looked around the opulent cabin, the discarded clothing, the rumpled bed, and finally back to Jack. You think this is something we can just survive. You think I am going to smile, nod, and play the understanding wife while you explain away fucking Patty Williams. Mom, Kyle said softly from the doorway, stepping in to place a protective hand on her shoulder. Let's go. He's not worth it. Diane didn't take her eyes off Jack. The man standing before her was a stranger. The distinguished principled patriarch of the Abbott family was gone, replaced by a weak, pathetic shell of a man who had succumbed to the delusions of a madwoman. It's over, Jack Diane declared, the words dropping from her lips like heavy stones into a bottomless well. Our marriage is over. It is completely, irrevocably dead. There is nothing left to salvage here. No, Jack cried out, his voice raw and desperate. You can't say that. You can't just throw us away. Not after everything we fought for. I am not the one who threw us away, Diane screamed, her composure finally breaking. You did. You threw us away the second you laid down in that bed. You let Victor Newman win. He wanted to destroy you, Jack, and you handed him the sledgehammer and asked him to swing. Jack fell to his knees, his pride completely abandoned. Diane, please. I was out of my mind. The heat, the stress, the fear of never seeing you again. Patty manipulated the situation. She wouldn't let me off the boat. I thought, if I just played along, if I just gave her what she wanted, I could get back to you. Diane stared down at him, her expression hardening into a mask of pure ice. The sight of him on his knees begging did not stir an ounce of pity in her heart. It only fueled her disgust. Do you hear yourself? Diane asked, her tone dripping with contempt. You slept with another woman, a woman who has terrorized our family to get back to me. What kind of twisted, sick logic is that? You are a grown man, Jack Abbott. You had a choice. You could have fought. You could have waited for us. We were tearing the city apart looking for you, and this is how you repay my loyalty. It was a moment of weakness, Jack sobbed. It was the final straw, Diane interrupted, her voice slicing through his excuses like a scalpel. I spent years proving to you, to your family, to all of Genoa City, that I had changed, that I was worthy of your love. I endured the insults from Phyllis, the sneers from Nikki, the constant doubt from Ashley. I stood by you against everyone. And you, the first time things get difficult, the first time you're backed into a corner, you betray me in the most humiliating way imaginable. She turned on her heel, the hem of her coat swirling around her legs. I refused to listen to another word. Keep your excuses, Jack. Keep your apologies. And keep Patty. You deserve each other. Without looking back, Diane marched out of the stateroom, brushing past Billy, who stood in stunned silence. Kyle immediately followed his mother, casting one last deeply disappointed glare at his father before slamming the cabin door shut. The drive back to the Abbott mansion was suffocatingly silent. The dark streets of Genoa City flashed by the windows, a blur of streetlights and shadows. Diane sat in the passenger seat of Kyle's car, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed blindly on the road ahead. Her mind was a chaotic whirlwind of shattered memories and agonizing betrayal. When they finally pulled into the grand driveway of the Abbott estate, the imposing brick mansion looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum. It was the place where she had rebuilt her life, the place where she and Jack had exchanged their vows, promising to love and honor each other until the end of their days. Now it was just a house filled with ghosts. Inside the foyer, the silence was deafening. Diane dropped her purse onto the console table and let out a shaky breath, her shoulders finally slumping. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep, crushing exhaustion. Kyle gently took her coat, his eyes filled with a profound sorrow. He had spent his entire adult life wishing for his parents to be together, to be a family. Seeing that dream violently ripped apart by his father's actions was tearing him apart. But his loyalty in this moment was absolute. "Mom," Kyle said softly, guiding her into the living room and sitting her down on the plush sofa. "Can I get you anything? A drink? Water?" Diane shook her head slowly, staring blankly at the unlit fireplace. How could he, Kyle? How could he do this to us? Kyle sat beside her, wrapping a strong, comforting arm around her shoulders. He pulled her close, letting her rest her head against his chest. "I don't know, Mom. I really don't. What he did. It's unforgivable. I am so incredibly sorry." "I defended him," Diane whispered, a single tear escaping and tracking down her cheek. "I believed in him when no one else did. I thought our love was invincible." "It's not your fault," Kyle said fiercely, his voice thick with emotion. "None of this is your fault. Dad made a choice, and it was a disgusting, selfish choice. You have every right to be furious. You have every right to walk away." Diane looked up at her son, seeing the unwavering support in his eyes. It gave her the strength she desperately needed. She wasn't alone. She had Kyle. "I can't stay here," Diane said, her voice gaining a newfound resolve. "I can't sleep in that bed. I can't look at his things. I can't breathe the same air as him." "You don't have to," Kyle assured her, squeezing her hand. "Whatever you decide to do, wherever you want to go, I am completely on your side. I will help you with whatever you need." Diane stood up, the lingering traces of vulnerability vanishing from her demeanor. She was Diane Jenkins. She had survived faking her own death, she had survived the wrath of Victor Newman, and she would survive Jack Abbott's betrayal. She marched up the grand staircase, her footsteps purposeful and heavy. Entering the master bedroom, she immediately walked to her expansive walk-in closet and pulled down 3 large designer suitcases. She unzipped them with sharp, aggressive movements, laying them open on the bed she had shared with Jack. She didn't pack everything. She didn't want the expensive gowns Jack had bought her for the society galas, nor did she want the priceless jewelry that felt more like a collar than a gift. She packed her essentials, her comfortable clothes, her favorite shoes, her personal toiletries, and the few mementos that belonged strictly to her long before she became Mrs. Jack Abbott again. She moved quickly, methodically, showing a fierce determination to leave Genoa City without a single ounce of hesitation. Every time a memory of Jack tried to infiltrate her thoughts, his smile, his touch, the way he used to look at her, she ruthlessly shoved it aside, replacing it with the burned-in image of him tangled in the sheets with Patty Williams. Kyle stood in the doorway, watching his mother pack with a mixture of sadness and awe. He admired her strength. She wasn't falling apart. She was taking control. "Do you need help with those?" Kyle asked as Diane zipped up the final suitcase. "No, I have it," Diane said, pulling the luggage off the bed. She walked over to the vanity and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were red, but her jaw was set. She reached up and unclasped the diamond necklace Jack had given her for their anniversary. It felt heavy, suffocating. She let it drop onto the glass surface with a dismissive clatter. Next came her wedding ring. She slid the massive diamond off her finger and placed it directly next to the necklace. "I am leaving nothing of value behind," Diane murmured, looking at the jewelry, "because none of this holds any value to me anymore." Diane pulled her phone from her pocket and opened a travel application. Her thumb hovered over the screen. where to Genoa City was tainted. The entire town would soon be buzzing with the scandalous details of Jack's infidelity. She could already picture Phyllis gloating, Nikki smirking, and the rest of the high society vultures whispering behind their hands at the athletic club. She needed to be far away from the Newman and Abbott wars. She needed distance, anonymity, and peace. Any foes too tenders? The thought blossomed in her mind like a beacon of light. Paris was where she had lived during her years in hiding. It was where she had found a semblance of peace before the pull of her son had brought her back to the toxic web of Genoa City. The cobblestone streets, the anonymous cafes, the art, the culture, it was a world away from the suffocating drama of Wisconsin. Or perhaps somewhere even more remote, a villa in Tuscany, a quiet beach house in the Maldives, somewhere where the name Abbott meant absolutely nothing. She needed a fresh start, a complete reset after this catastrophic heartbreak. She quickly selected a first-class one-way ticket to Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, departing from Chicago O'Hare in just a few hours. She tapped Confirm Purchase and watched the screen load, finalizing her departure. "I'm going to Paris," Diane announced, looking up at Kyle. "Tonight." Kyle nodded, masking his own pain at the thought of his mother leaving again. But he knew this was different. She wasn't running away from her mistakes. She was walking away from Jack's. "I'll drive you to the airport. I'll make sure you get there safely." "Thank you, Kyle," Diane said, stepping forward to pull her son into a tight embrace. "I love you. Never doubt that. You are the only good thing that ever came out of my relationship with Jack." Hours later, the front door of the Abbott mansion opened with a slow, agonizing creak. Jack Abbott stepped into the dark, silent foyer. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a single night. His clothes were rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were hollow, haunted pits of despair. He had finally managed to extricate himself from the yacht, leaving a delusional Patty behind for the authorities to handle, but the victory of escaping Victor's trap tasted like ash in his mouth. He had lost the only thing that truly mattered. Diane Jack called out his voice, a pathetic, wavering croak. Silence answered him. He slowly climbed the stairs, his hand gripping the banister so tightly his knuckles turned white. He pushed open the door to the master bedroom and flipped on the light. The room was impeccably clean, but it felt entirely empty. The closet doors were slightly ajar, revealing the missing suitcases and the empty spaces where Diane's clothes used to hang. And then he saw it. Sitting on the vanity glittering under the harsh overhead light was her wedding ring and the anniversary necklace. Jack's knees finally gave out. He collapsed onto the floor at the foot of the bed, burying his face in his hands. A raw, guttural sob tore from his throat, echoing through the empty mansion. The realization crashed down upon him with the weight of a collapsing building. He had lost her. He had survived Victor Newman's sinister kidnapping. He had survived the isolation, but he had destroyed his own marriage in the process. He was entirely, completely alone. He couldn't accept it, but the empty room and the discarded ring offered no room for denial. The sudden violent collapse of his world was entirely his own doing. By the time the sun rose over Genoa City the next morning, the whispers had already begun. In the lavish dining room of the Genoa City Athletic Club, socialites leaned over their mimosas, their voices hushed, but their eyes alight with malicious glee. Over at Society, the morning coffee crowd was buzzing with the explosive rumor. Asterisk. Did you hear Diane left Jack? Asterisk. Asterisk. I heard she caught him in bed with Patty Williams. Asterisk. Asterisk. Victor Newman orchestrated the whole thing. Asterisk. Genoa City was bracing for a shockwave of epic proportions. The Abbott patriarch, the man who had stood on his moral high ground for years, had fallen in the most spectacular, scandalous way possible. The impending divorce would not be quiet. It would be a loud, messy, and deeply public spectacle that would drag the Abbott name through the mud and reignite the bitterest feuds the city had ever seen. The high society of Genoa City thrived on tragedy, and Jack Abbott had just served them a feast. The marriage that had survived, fake deaths, corporate espionage, and endless family interference, had finally been annihilated by a single night on a yacht. As Jack sat alone in his massive empty house, and Diane's plane soared high over the Atlantic toward Paris, the city prepared for war. The marriage was over, but the fallout was only just beginning. The destruction of Jack and Diane was complete, leaving nothing but the wreckage of a shattered trust for all of Genoa City to witness.